How do you know if you're getting any better on your instrument? Well, I think I've come up with a method that works pretty well. We dig into topics like this every week in our email newsletter. If you're not on board yet, consider subscribing. Links in the description below. And this idea was suggested by a viewer. And I thought, yeah, there's something there. What if we could come up with a checklist of sorts to determine whether or not we're getting better on this instrument? And I have done a checklist video about bowing before, which I will link to here. I went down the rabbit hole and did some internet research, and I put it all together into a checklist. That is in the description below, so you can download that, follow along, and use it kind of like people use checklists in other fields. And we musicians are long overdue for a checklist like this because there's so much subtlety to this endless game of music performance, of expressivity, of technique on an instrument. It's got an athletic component, it's got an artistic component, it's got emotional components. There's a lot there, and trying to get clinical about it and break it down into measurable chunks, I find super helpful, and I know a lot of other people do too. Then we start off with technical skills. These are the nuts and bolts. This is like going to the gym and doing sit-ups and push-ups and squats and all that kind of work. By the way, we've covered just about every one of these components in a separate video, so I will put together a playlist with all those videos in the order of this checklist, so you can check that out in the description below. First off, our technical skills, and intonation accuracy has got to be at the top of everybody's list. It's certainly at the top of my list, and we bass players have been notoriously guilty of playing out of tune for decades and generations, and it's just a big instrument. It's tricky to get around, but everybody struggles with intonation, and making sure that you spend time every single day really dialing it in, really getting focused on that, that's going to lay the foundation for everything else, technical, musical, and all aspects of your playing. Then for us string players, certainly we have bow control and technique. Your bow is your voice, your bow is your breath, and having control over that and various diction elements, articulations, and all that kind of good stuff is key. But we'd only be playing open strings if we didn't focus on our left hand, so our dexterity and accuracy in the left hand, that is critical to check in with. Then there's vibrato for us string players, but really for all musicians. Vibrato, depending on the style, maybe you use not much, maybe you use a lot, but the more you have in your tonal palette for vibrato, the more you're going to be able to do on your instrument or with your voice. Then we have musical expression. How much can you express? And dynamics are key to making an interesting performance, so making sure that you have capacity at the forte end, at the piano end, is very important. Then there's phrasing and musicality, and we can always be doing a better job on that. I spend every day thinking a bit about my phrasing, thinking a bit about pushing the envelope in terms of what I can do, how beautiful can I make a phrase, how can I just give some elegance to that gesture. Then there's variety of articulation, my short notes, my long notes, and everything in between. Do I have some spicy material and some sweet material to work with? Then your tone, just in general, both variety of tone and consistency of tone where appropriate. How many different colors can you get out of your instrument, and what kind of control do you have over your tone? We don't want to just play scales and arpeggios. That's not why we got into music. So having some repertoire under your fingers is critical for musical enjoyment and progressing on your instrument. So how many pieces do you have under your belt? And that's going to vary depending on what type of player you are, how many tunes you know if you're a jazz player or an acoustic music player, bluegrass player. If you're a classical bass player like me, how many solo pieces do you know? How can you get up and play a 30-minute recital if asked to immediately? It's a good skill to have. I am called upon to do that pretty frequently. If you are an orchestral player, do you know the major pieces? Do you know the Beethoven symphonies, the Mozart symphonies, the Strauss tone poems, Bach, all those foundational composers? And do you have command over the challenging parts of those pieces? Can you play Heldenleben No. 9? Can you play the Bottesini Concerto, the 16th notes at the end of the first movement? Can you play the crazy stuff at the end of Beethoven 9 or Beethoven 5, Scherzo Trio, or any of those pieces that are standard in our repertoire? How varied is your repertoire? Do you just know those standards, or do you have some other pieces in your repertoire? Do you play Baroque pieces and contemporary pieces and improvised pieces and pizzicato pieces and harmonic bass pieces and contemporary pieces and classics from hundreds of years ago? How much do you explore? Then how are your practice habits? And we can all be doing better at that. I know I'm trying to get my practice habits better every single day, every single week. And consistency is key for me. I try to make sure that I practice a little bit every day, even if it's not much. Just not breaking that chain is really important for making it a part of my routine, my daily life, and sustaining, but also improving in various aspects of my musicianship. There's duration of practice time, but then the quality of that time. I try to make sure that even if it's a few minutes, it's a quality few minutes. I'd rather practice for 20 solid minutes than an unfocused hour. I'd rather practice for a focused hour than both of those. But how much time do you get on the instrument? Certainly, but what is the quality of that time? And then do you just start at the beginning and get to the end? And what types of practice techniques do you use? And do you vary them? Do you use a drone? Do you use a metronome? Do you turn it all off? Do you record yourself? All of those different methods of practicing will enhance the way you work on the bass. So just checking in and making sure you're not just doing the same dang thing every single day will help you move forward. This is all theoretical if we're talking about practicing at home or in the practice room, but you've got to be able to take your skills on stage and perform in public. So what's your stage presence like? What's your confidence like? How good are you at taking what you practice on your own and taking it to the public? There are many ways to work on this, but recording can be super helpful. So making sure that you play for people, but also record yourself on a regular basis will really help with this. And that's true for performing under pressure. The pressure's on when you're taking an audition or you have an exposed moment in a piece, or maybe you're the featured soloist on a concert. So just making sure that you are thinking about how things are going to be different for you when you're actually playing in the moment and the music's flowing. And that's true also for ensemble playing, which is what most of us bass players do. Solo bass is great, but most of us pick up this instrument to play in a band or an orchestra or do our own kind of creative projects. So can you play well with others? Do you have good ensemble skills? And that's something that will come with time and experience. And one of the best things to do in terms of the checklist is just making sure that you're getting time in an ensemble. And if you're just starting out, join a group of like-minded, similar level musicians. And if you're feeling a little bit uninspired and maybe like you're lacking in your progress, just look at how much you are playing with other people. If you can find a way to increase that or add some playing that maybe you don't do so much of, that might be the thing to jumpstart your practicing. Then there are aural skills, what the wonderful bassist Kenneth Knutson talked to me about on a podcast years ago about just your musicianship, working on your musicianship. And that includes practicing your instrument, but also your auditory listening aural skills. It's just so important for everything in music. So pitch recognition, and that can be as simple as turning on a tuner and matching that, or maybe playing fifths and fourths and then thirds and sixths against the tuner, just making sure that you have the ability to match pitch, hear the next pitch, and be rock solid in your pitch. Again, going back to the very beginning of this checklist, intonation is key. I think listening to repertoire is important. It's an important part of working in my musicianship, certainly. So am I listening to the pieces that I am working on? And the great double bassist and pedagogue Bert Turetsky once said, listening to one piece, one recording is great, two recordings is great, three recordings is research. And I tried to make sure I do my research and I am listening to the repertoire I'm playing and repertoire I might want to play and repertoire that maybe I never want to play, but I find inspiring. Listening helps me become a better musician, and I need to check in and make sure that I'm doing that consistently. Finally, there's sight reading, and I am called upon to play sight reading quite a bit. There are many, many ways to develop that skill, and just making sure that you are consistently working on it will help with that. So how do you actually put this into action? Well, there are many ways, from just very zoomed out to very in the weeds and in your face. And I think you could just take this checklist and print it out, have it near you, or have it on your iPad or your device, and just take a look at it as you're warming up, as you're doing your stretches, as you're getting ready to go. That might be enough. Or maybe you're somebody who wants to get a little more tactical. Take all of these and find a way to check in with them regularly. You can put them all into a practice list in an app like Modacity, which I love, or just on a sheet of paper, and break them down. Maybe Monday do one or two, Tuesday do another couple, or maybe you could take and just focus on technical skills on week 1, and then musical development on week 2, and many different ways to do it. My bass teacher in college, Michael Hovnanian from the Chicago Symphony, he had an analogy that I really liked. It's keeping the plates spinning. So when you're working on preparing for something, or just making sure that you're developing and progressing in general, it's like keeping all these, you see one of those plates kind of like, oh, maybe the repertoire I'm not developing, or maybe I'm not listening enough, or maybe my intonation's slipping. It's checking in and making sure that everything really does have some momentum going to it. And if you want to learn more about this subject, check out what we've got linked up here. That was good enough.